Good morning, and welcome to our next unit, which is the world of Islam. We're going to start off talking about the rise of Islam and where Islam was located. The Arabs lived in the Arabian Peninsula, which was like a desert land that didn't have very many rivers or lakes. They were nomadic for this purpose and moved constantly to find water and food for their animals. After domestication of the camel, they were able to populate the desert and establish towns along trade routes. The Arabs organized themselves in tribes led by a sheikh. Most Arabs were polytheistic and recognized a supreme god named Allah. They traced their ancestors to Abraham and his son Ishmael, who built a house of worship called the Kaaba at Mecca. So this is the Kaaba at Mecca. And if you are Muslim, you make the pilgrimage to Mecca. That's one of your 5 pillars of Islam. And you pray here. It is very sacred, very holy. If you are not Muslim, you are not allowed to be a part of this. So the way that Islam, or the religion of Islam began, Muhammad is basically like your founder of Islam. Muhammad was born in Mecca to a merchant family and was orphaned around age 5. So he became a caravan manager and then married a rich widow named Khadijah. So Muhammad would, after he's married, he would visit the hills and go meditate over the greediness of the wealthy elite. So he would talk about how greedy people were and how they needed to be more thankful for what they had and how this wasn't the way that, that Allah intended things to be. It is said that while he was out in the hills on one of his visits, that he received revelations from God. And so during his meditation, God sent Gabriel, this angel, to deliver these messages to him. Muhammad believed that Allah had already revealed himself through Moses and Jesus, and now Allah was revealing himself to him. So according to Muhammad, he believed that like Moses and Jesus were basically disciples of Allah or disciples of God. And so he's looking at himself and viewing himself as a prophet of this religion because God has chosen him and spoken to him directly. So Muhammad wrote down the messages that he received from the angel Gabriel from Allah into the Quran. And this is like the holy book of Islam, like the Bible of Islam, if you will. Islam means peace through submission to the will of Allah. Islam has only one God, and that is Allah. Muhammad is God's prophet. He preached for 3 years in Mecca and only gained 30 followers. So whenever he started out, he didn't really gain a whole lot. A whole lot of people weren't really willing to listen to him. And so instead of staying in Mecca, he moved to Medina, north of the city of Mecca. So the journey to Medina is called Hijrah. Muhammad gained support from the people of Medina and the Bedouins, who are just Arabs who had lived in the desert. Those are those Arabs that we were talking about that migrate from place to place. So people in Medina looked at Muhammad and they were like, we believe you. We think that this is true and we agree with your teachings. And so they became the first community of practicing Muslims. Islam is the religion. If you practice the religion of Islam, then you are a Muslim. Just FYI, that's the difference there. So Muhammad gained a lot of followers in Medina, and he decided to launch a military offense consisting of 10,000 soldiers to convert the people of Mecca to Islam because they had rejected him and he only gained 30 followers. He's like, you know what, let's just, let's lead this military coup. Like, we need to let them know this is the way of God. This is what, Allah wants for us. And so they launch this attack. They are pretty successful. Muhammad then declares the Kaaba a sacred shrine to Islam. All Muslims are encouraged to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, and that's known as the Hajj. More than 2 million Muslims actually make this pilgrimage annually. So 2 million. You're encouraged to make it once in your lifetime as a Muslim, but there are, several who make it every year. It's like a family trip, and it's a very like religious, holy experience. So, Islam is monotheistic. Once again, Allah is the only God. It's the all-powerful being who created the universe and everything in it. Islam emphasizes salvation and offers the hope of an afterlife. It's very similar to Christianity in that sense. One God created everything, salvation, and hope in an afterlife. So there's some similarities here. Those who desire to achieve a life after death must subject themselves to the will of Allah. Islam does not believe that its first preacher was divine because Muhammad sinned. He was not like Jesus. Like Jesus, whenever we talk about Christianity, Jesus didn't sin. He was holy. He was clean. He was pure. Muhammad is a man, and so he's not divine. He's not some divine being. He sins. He's just like everyone else. To obey the will of Allah means to practice the 5 pillars of Islam. And so your 5 pillars of Islam are belief, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. So obviously you have to believe that there's no deity but one God, and Muhammad is his messenger. So you have to, admit that Allah is the one God. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. You have to pray and perform the prescribed prayers 5 times a day. Charity is giving part of one's wealth to the poor. Pretty self-explanatory. Because, Muhammad is all about, how greedy the wealthy are. Like, instead of being greedy, you should give what you can to help other people out. Fasting, which is refraining from food and drink from dawn to sunset through the month of Ramadan. And then pilgrimage, making a pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime. Now, with Islam comes what we know as Sharia law. So Sharia was developed after Muhammad's death to give believers a set of practical laws to regulate their daily lives, because they didn't really have Muhammad there to tell them, like, no, that's not acceptable. This is acceptable. This is what Allah would like. This is what Allah would not like. And so Sharia law is developed to kind of give them a guide. It's based on interpretations of the Quran and the example set by Muhammad in his own life. So they try to make it as close to something that Muhammad or Allah would have preferred as they can. It regulates family life, business practice, government, and moral conduct. It does not separate religious matters from civil or political law. So whenever you go to a predominantly Muslim nation, or if that nation practices Islam, it's their official religion, then they are going to incorporate that religious law, Sharia law, into their own government. So Muslims are forbidden to gamble, they can't eat pork, they cannot drink alcoholic beverages, and they cannot engage in dishonest behavior, according to Sharia law. Now, as far as conquest, in your map here that I've posted, this is what all was Islamic State at the death of Muhammad. Okay. So then you have this area here that is the death of Ali. And then you have this other territory that is the Umayyad dynasty. Then you have the Abbasid dynasty, which is this darker green over here, where this is where Islam has spread. And obviously this over here is part of the Umayyad dynasty as well. So Abu Bakr was Muhammad's father-in-law. So after Muhammad dies, Abu Bakr is chosen as his successor and named caliph. A caliph is just like your religious leader, your pastor, your preacher, something similar along those lines. So the Muslims united and expanded over Arabia under the leadership of Abu Bakr. The Quran permitted fair defensive warfare as jihad, or a struggle in the way of God. And so these Arabs conquered the Byzantine army and took control of Syria, Egypt, Northern Africa, and the Persian Empire by 650. And so as Abu Bakr is becoming this new caliph, he's also really instilling this whole like, we need to conquer more territory. We need to spread the word of, we need to spread the word of Allah and spread Muhammad's message so that all these other nations can see like that this, this religion, this is it. This is the way to the afterlife. And so that's why they start conquering territory. So the Umayyads are basically from Ali, who is the son-in-law of Muhammad. He ruled as caliph until he was assassinated in 661. So after Ali is assassinated, Muawiyah, which is a rival of Ali, someone who didn't really, care for him, started what is known as the Umayyad dynasty in 661. So Ali dies, he is assassinated, and then Muawiyah takes over and starts the Umayyad dynasty. So Muawiyah was only known for using force when necessary, and so he's not really one to want to conquer and like spread and have a lot of conquests. So he moves the capital of the Arab Empire from Medina to Damascus in Syria. He thought that was like more central. And the Arab Empire expanded under the leadership of the Umayyads until 750. So their expansion brought wealth, new ethnic groups, and contact with other civilizations. So the new empire was influenced by the Byzantine and Persian culture. And so you'll see a lot of the influences in their architecture and their art. Even the very first, the first slide, like the background of it is just very bright, very colorful, very Persian. And so a lot of their artwork and a lot of their decorations, their buildings are influenced by these cultures as a result of this. So here, your capital is moved from here to Damascus, and Damascus really is a little more central, but it takes away, your Medina is kind of like where everything started. This is where Muhammad first gained, a great number of followers, and it's the first Islamic territory. So anyway. So you have a split in Islam. It's basically Hussein, who is the son of Ali. Remember, Ali was assassinated. Hussein encourages his followers to rise up against the Umayyad rule because he believes that he's rightfully the ruler. He's like, my dad was assassinated. I should be the ruler. So he set off to do battle, but his soldiers defected and left him with an army of 72 warriors against 10,000 Umayyad soldiers. And so he tries to take his seat as like the rightful caliph back, and is definitely, defeated. So his force fought courageously, but they died. His struggle led to a split in Islam into two groups. So now we have the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. Shia Muslims accept only the descendants of Ali as the true rulers of Islam. And so they don't agree with the Umayyad dynasty. They don't agree with the Umayyads ruling. They believe that Ali and Hussein should have been the rulers. Like Hussein should have taken over after Ali was assassinated. So the Sunni Muslims did not agree with Umayyad rule, but they accepted them as rulers, and so they were a little more complacent. Sunnis are the majority in the Muslim world, but most people in Iraq and neighboring Iran consider themselves to be Shia. So you have more people who accept the Umayyads as rulers than you do Shia today. And so these are your you got your guide over here. These are the Shia Muslims. And then you have the Sunni, which are all of the lighter green color. Very, like, way more prominent. So the Abbasid dynasty built a new capital at the city of Baghdad on the Tigris River. This increased trade influence and influence from the Persians. Corruption of the Abbasid dynasty eventually led to the division in the Muslim Empire as well. So you have the Turks and the Crusades. That causes problems as well. So the Turks captured the Abbasid Caliph in 1055 and then took command of the government and the military. So now the Abbasid Caliph has like been captured and they're being ruled by the Turks, which is another outside group. So the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I asked Christian states of Europe for help against the Islamic Turks because they're trying to conquer everything, and he is at risk for losing his empire, the Byzantine Empire. So in 1096, he was okay with the Muslims because they were, more complacent than the Turks. They're a little more violent. So in 1096, the Europeans began a series of crusades against Muslims. And we'll talk about the Crusades later on, and you guys will really enjoy the Crusades. Very pointless, basically. So the Muslim rulers lost in the invading Crusaders until the Sultan Saladin took control of Egypt and Syria in 1169. So he fought back against the Christians, where the rest of the Muslims had just kind of like chilled out. So Saladin perks up. He fights against the Christians. His army invades the kingdom of Jerusalem. They destroy Christian forces in 1187. All in all, the Christian Crusades were a waste of time and lives. They should have just let things be, honestly. So the Islamic civilization prospered in trade by using ships and camel caravans. So from south of the Sahara, they got gold and slaves. From China, you get silk and porcelain. From Africa comes gold and ivory, and we'll talk more about Africa in the next chapter. From Southeast Asia and India, you get sandalwood and spices. And then in Egypt, you have grain. Egypt is under Arab control at this time, and so they contribute food to the Islamic civilization. So Iraq was they had provided linens and dates and stones and things like that. And Western India also provided textiles. So there's a large conglomeration of different goods coming from literally all around the world, all around the ancient world. Islamic cities had a distinctive physical appearance. Most impressive buildings were palaces for caliphs or local governors and mosques for worship. So there were also public buildings with fountains and secluded courtyards. They had public baths, kind of like the Romans did, and bazaars. A bazaar is just like a covered market, and it's an important part of Muslim cities. That's where you would go to trade goods, buy goods from other, nations. You trade, you do things like that. It's like a market. Customers could compare prices, seek the best bargains. Inspectors would enforce rules. And basically, they would say, like, you have to wash these counters daily. You have to wash these containers. It also housed many of the craftspeople's shops, as well as laundries and bathhouses. So this is an example of a bazaar. And you see you've got this covering here. And people are just kind of like going around. They have tables set up. They have counters set up with all their different goods. And, you can kind of bargain, trade, see what you want. Really good shopping place. Here's one of the bathhouses. And if you see the architecture here, the rounded architecture, the stone that they use, they have these like skylights here. Not really like lights. They're literally sunlights, like sunroof. Anyway, very beautiful architecture. So as far as farming, a majority of people still lived in the country, which made their living, they made their living by farming and herding animals. In the early stages of the empire, most of the farmland was owned by independent peasants. Later, you had wealthy landowners who started like taking large estates, and a lot of the lands that were owned by the state were farmed by slave labor. So in river valleys, most farmers remained independent peasants and continued to farm the way their ancestors had, even while cities became more urbanized. And so you have some places that are kind of like developing more. You have some places that are a little more advanced as far as like, whenever I don't know that I would call slave labor advanced, but you have wealthier people who have larger estates, is what I would say. And then you have these just like kind of small farmers who are off to the side doing things traditionally on their own. They don't use slave labor. So to be a Muslim, you not only had to worship Allah, but also live a life to his teachings. So as far as social structure, you had an upper class, which would be like your ruling families and like officials or wealthy merchants. And then you had your ordinary merchants who were considered middle class, unlike those in Europe, India, or China. And slaves. So they thought their own people could not be slaves. So they imported slaves from Africa or a non-Islamic population, which they had usually captured from like war or conquest. Slaves often served in the army, and most of them were used as domestic servants. So slavery is very common in the ancient world. Like, let me reiterate that. Women were granted social and spiritual equality. They could inherit property. Every woman had a male guardian. Parents would arrange marriages. The Quran allowed Muslims to have more than one wife, but no more than 4. And most of the time, whenever you have more than one wife, it's, for the purposes of like having children. Most men cannot afford more than one, though, because you had to pay a dowry to the bride's family. So it's not very common that you see people with more than one wife because it's expensive. Adultery is forbidden to both men and women, which is kind of ironic considering men can have, several wives. The custom of requiring women to cover their body in public is still commonly practiced today, and rights and customs of Islamic women today are still in question. So, covering your body and being more conservative with what skin you show is definitely a part of the Islamic culture. That's just the decent thing to do. It's respectable, and so a lot of women are okay with wearing the hijab or whatever covering because they believe that it is like spiritual. It is something that is it's religious. It's showing like submission to the will of Allah, and it's being modest. So your hijab is what is most it's most popular, I guess, what you would see most often. And it's just a scarf covering the head, the ears, and the neck. The face will remain visible, and this is widely used all around the Muslim world. The chador is just a long cloak that covers the body. This is traditionally worn by Iranian women, especially practicing Muslims. And like while the head is covered, the face still remains visible. Then the niqab is a full veil with a small slit for the eyes, and that's its use is spread due to the influence of the Wahhabi Islam from Saudi Arabia. It's mainly used in urban areas, so you don't see that as often around us. The burqa, on the other hand, is the full veil traditionally worn by Pashtuns in Afghanistan. And this one completely covers the head and the body, and then you have a mesh screen over their eyes, and it is obligatory under Taliban rule. So the burqa is probably the most conservative and probably the least common because it's only in parts of Afghanistan. So for Muslim women, wearing a veil or a head covering acts as a show of obedience to the Quran and to Allah, as well as a symbol of modesty and womanhood. So there's nothing wrong with wearing a veil or a head covering. It's not meant to degrade women. A lot of women welcome wearing the veil or the head covering. It's a sign of becoming a woman, and it's a sign of, submission to the will of Allah. It's your religious duty to be conservative. It says, tell women, the quote here is it's from a Muslim woman. It says, tell women in the West that Muslim women are like them in their family and community, their life and work. There are educated Muslim women, doctors, lawyers, teachers, workers. We're all the same. So they just dress differently than American women, and that's totally fine. So In the first few centuries of the Arab Empire, they were translating philosophy works from Plato and Aristotle. So it's here that Europeans received the works and translated them to Latin. Algebra was developed in the 9th century by an Arab mathematician. Yay, algebra. They also named the stars and knew that the Earth was round. And this picture here is actually an astrolabe, and it is used to, it's like a navigation tool, kind of like a compass, but it helps them determine their location on water by using the stars. And this is how a lot of Europeans actually sail to America and sail around the world. Like many years later, they use the astrolabe. But this is a Muslim invention. So I don't know how to work it. Don't ask me how to work it. It is very intricate, very detailed, but it is a very useful tool, and it allowed the discovery of new lands. It allowed a lot of travel and trade. Okay, I'll say that. I'll put it there. So they developed medicine as a field of scientific study as well. Avicenna wrote the medical encyclopedia that stressed the contagious nature of diseases way ahead of their time, and said that contamination could be spread by water supply, which is also way ahead of their time. You'll see whenever we get to the plague how important things like this are and how ignorant some of the Europeans are. They also wrote many history works to be studied. Thank you. And one of the most popular books is called Arabian Nights, and it's full of like unusual plots, comic and tragic situations, and a lot of unforgettable characters. So if you have seen the Disney movie Aladdin, or if you've heard of Aladdin, that's actually a tale from the Arabian Nights book. It's just full of, different stories. It's a book of, hundreds of other stories. And we're actually going to read a story from Arabian Nights also. So as far as architecture, this is one of the world's largest mosques that was developed at the time. Here you can see the rounded arches, the columns, the different colors that are used. This is all like influence from trade and networking with other territories like the Persians. This intricate detail on these buildings. It's just amazing. There's no telling how long different details like this took, carving this out, printing, painting, very beautiful, very intricate artwork, a lot of detail in their architecture. It's very beautiful. Also, in many structures they built, they actually had murder holes, and this is common in the Middle Ages as well. They use the murder holes to like defend themselves. Basically, what they would do if somebody had made it past like the first gates to come attack them, they would like pour hot oil out of the holes, or you could throw like spears or throw rocks or whatever out of the holes to kind of like keep someone from entering your home. So that was pretty common. And here's another beautiful architectural genius work that is of the the world of Islam, a product of the world of Islam, to leave you with. So this is it. Make sure that you've taken your notes. The next assignment, you should have already done the vocabulary assignment. The next assignment will be the reading. It's called The Story of the Hunchback, and it's a small story, a comedy story. It's supposed to be funny, from the Arabian Nights. All right. Y'all have a lovely week. Email me if you need anything. I'm here to help.